Solidaritate este cuvântul care a marcat Europa începând cu februarie 2022. Solidaritatea a fost cuvântul care a marcat și România, începând din momentul în care la granița noastră a început un conflict. Când România și-a deschis granițele pentru cei care au fugit din calea războiului. Este și cuvântul care stă la baza Zilei Mondiale a Refugiatului de anul acesta și cu această ocazie alături de noi este directorul biroului regional al UNHCR pentru Europa, domnul Philippe Leclerc. Hello and welcome to national television in Romania.
Hello and thank you very much for receiving me.
I wanted to ask you, why is there a migrant crisis in Europe right now?
Actually, I have to tell you, it's a refugee crisis because what we see over the world, sadly, is a multiplication of conflicts in Africa, in the Middle East, as Gaza is showing right now, as well as in Latin America and Asia. And Europe is not exception to that, sadly, because war has come back since the 24th February 22 in Ukraine, with the war with the Russian Federation, full-scale invasion, which continues to force people to flee their homes, either in the country itself or outside of the country, and becoming refugees. And this is happening all over the world, and the Security Council of the United Nations, which is supposed to be the organ to prevent conflict or to find solutions to conflicts, sadly is paralyzed with this polarization of the world today, which is leading to more conflicts and less solutions for ongoing conflicts. So the number of refugees has gone up to, and of internally displaced, as we have just mentioned through our report that we do every year, to 100 million, 20 million forcibly displaced throughout the world, which is the population of Japan. Both internally displaced because of conflict, or refugees when they leave their country and ask for protection outside because of conflicts or persecution.
Should this number frighten us?
I think, yes, it should frighten us because it is a consequence of what we see, of what is the world today. More wars, more persecution, less stability, less solutions, less management by the international community of preserving the most important element of living together, peace. And this, so having war, having conflict is of course frightening. The refugees are only the consequence of conflict, and of course we all need to respond to that phenomenon so that people are protected and that conflicts can be solved so that they can return. And hopefully in Ukraine as well, the end of the war is the target, so that people can envisage returning back to where it's home for them.
But for us to have solutions, we need to understand the profile of a refugee in Europe. How did it change in the last years?
Well, the last years, of course, has been very much dominated by the war back in Europe. We all thought, and the United Nations system after the Second World War has been built on peace, particularly after the Second World War, which mostly had the consequences in Europe itself. UNHCR, the Refugee Convention are the results of the war situation in the Second World War. So the fact that the war is coming back to Europe through this, it has prompted 6 million Ukrainians since the 24th February 22 to flee to other countries or to flee inside of their country. So the first situation of refugees in Europe remains the situation of the Ukrainian refugees who had to flee the ongoing consequences of war. The other type of refugee situation remain related to Syria. You know, more than 14 years of conflict in Syria with no durable peace yet, enabling people to voluntarily return to their country in conditions of dignity and security, because again states do not find a way of solving conflicts, and this is characterizing this fatigue also of some countries hosting refugees for a long time, like Lebanon, which is already confronted with so much individual difficulties as a country, hosting Palestinian refugees for more than 2 generations, and Syrian refugees for 13 years. And we see in Cyprus more than 3,000 Syrians who are leaving Lebanon because the conditions of life for them are so difficult, and the conditions for them to return to their country are not secure enough. So we see part of the Syrians trying to come to the European Union through Cyprus. We also see people who may not be refugees, and these are these mixed movements of people who are moving for other reasons than the war or persecution, but just for basic ways of living a decent life. Also sometimes because of the climate dimension, which is not a situation as such provoking displacement, but the rarefication of water creates additional conflicts, leading people to move to other areas than their own.
But if you could think of a person who left Ukraine and came to live in Europe right now, what would he or she look like? What would he be interested in? What are his fears?
Most of the Ukrainian refugees that I meet in many European countries, including in Romania, as I have discussed today, are mostly women and children. As you know, most of them are people who have left because of the war. Often their husbands or fathers have remained to fight the war. And this is very particular to see separated families coming in. It's a challenge in itself to have not the whole family together and living this separation where you know that your father, your husband can possibly die because of the war or be wounded. So this is an additional situation of stress that many families have, and this has lasted more than 2.5 years now. So living with this situation of not being able to return to your country in security with some future is extremely difficult for each of the Ukrainians I see in many countries. Despite their love for their country, they are torn between making sure that their children have access to education, can have a life where they can contribute in the future. And these are the very difficult feelings that people have of living in another country, trying to integrate in that country for the necessary time that they have to live in that country. So this is what we ask and that we see societies like Romania and others in Europe hosting these women and children, for the most of them, to live that very difficult time of war in their country.
You've mentioned fatigue earlier. We've seen European countries who say they have issues with the number of refugees they're getting. We see a European pact for migrants and asylum. What is your stance on this pact? Is it useful or not?
Well, when I mentioned fatigue, I was mentioning, for example, Lebanon, which is confronted to an extreme situation where the economy is totally down, where a war is at its borders with Gaza, and extreme instability. And in addition to these circumstances, they are hosting for more than 14 years a considerable number of refugees who represent, with the Palestinians, 6% of their population. So it's a very high number and proportion of the people living in that country. What we do not see yet that much fatigue regarding the Ukrainians who are living in most of the countries in Europe, and it's a sign of hope, of resistance of the local societies faced with a high number of people. So what we see more is the solidarity that the European countries and the European people are showing towards Ukrainians living side by side in their country. There are no camps. People are living in the areas where other people live. They are going gradually to the same schools. They are living together. So this is the solidarity that I want to mention, because it's not only negative feelings that we see, but very concrete solidarity, which is lasting more than 2.5 years for Ukrainians. Where we see more difficulties is also reflected in political debates at elections, is the fear of the foreigner, the fear of something which will never be solved, so that people will not be able to return to their countries, that they are coming to very different countries, crossing the Mediterranean Sea.
With different cultures.
With different cultures. But again, the 34 years I have been working in this institution of UNHCR has showed me that people can definitely live together despite their differences, because what is uniting them is to make sure that children are safe, children go to school, that they have a future for their children in particular. And if we can come back to these human realities rather than going towards myths often of who foreigners are, we can see in many countries that people can live together. But that solutions need to be found to what I was explaining before, to these situations of war, continuous war, too long wars, or situations of displacement because of lack of structures, or even the consequences of the climate change. And what is lacking, I think, and the people in many countries in Europe feel that this is not managed properly. So the Pact on Migration and Asylum, despite the various positions that each of the 27 EU member states has, is a compromise between countries that are not comfortable with more foreigners living in their societies, and others who are more open to that. But the Pact is providing rules that enable, in cases of influx, measures that will make sure that it's not only the people, I mean the states at the borders who will be confronted with the influx of people, but that the people are, if they are asylum seekers, not any person. So that is very important, that this compromise has been reached after 10 years of discussion between countries like Hungary and Poland, for example, who had a more rigid or strict attitude towards managing inflows from migrants and refugees, and other countries. And again, we always try to see the positive part of that. The positive is that they have reached an agreement. There are settled rules for which these 27 European countries can work with. There are solidarity mechanisms between countries who are more affected by arrivals than others, and there are common rules on when people arrive irregularly and how to react and respond to that in a human way, but also in a way by which procedures will find those who are in need of international protection because their state of origin cannot provide that protection or even is persecuting them, and that those who would not be in need of international protection and who would enter irregularly the European Union could be sent back to their countries of origin after a procedure has taken place.
Please tell me if there is something you'll never forget that a refugee mentioned to you.
Well, I think when thinking of that, I have many stories of individuals I have met after 34 years of working with them. But the separation of families in particular, and when we are able, with many other actors, to reunite people, to reunite a child which has been separated from his mother, and that I see that after 1 year and a half of procedure, this 17-year-old child is meeting his mother at a border, and that we have been able to allow this reunification. There are no words for that. You just have feelings, and these are feelings that you never forget. And this is why, after 34 years, I continue to work in this area, which can sound very frustrating, very dramatic. But as long as you find solutions for several of these people so that they are reunified, that they live a decent life, it makes me proud of the work that international organizations with the civil society can do in favor of people so that they can live again on their feet and have a decent life.
Thank you very, very much for this interview. Doamnelor și domnilor, această discuție a ajuns la final. Sunt 120 de milioane de persoane care au plecat de acasă în 2023. Însă nu sunt doar numere, sunt poveștile unor oameni care au nevoie de ajutor. Sunt Ilinca Nazarie și am discutat astăzi cu directorul biroului regional al UNHCR pentru Europa, Philippe Leclerc. Vă mulțumesc!